have been some pretty tough acts to follow. I don't know about that shaving cream. That's really something. That's a little one. Anyway, great to be here and to be able to speak to you. I've been asked to talk about the landscape that surrounds your school and how it has come to be the way that you find it. And it is a fascinating story, and it meshes perfectly with what Phil Zay was telling you about the history of this institution. And I think you'll benefit from a little more understanding, perhaps, of the landscape around the school, the fields, the forests, and how things came to be the way we find them today. And to understand, we really need to crank back to the 1600s when New Hampshire and New England were beginning to be settled by Europeans, primarily from the British Isles. And we need to think first of the enormous challenges that these people were going to encounter when they arrived on the coast over at Portsmouth or at Plymouth Rock or wherever. The first great challenge, of course, was being able to feed themselves. They had been on the sea for 90 days or more. And when they arrived on the coast, there was no food awaiting them. There was no McDonald's at all. It was necessary to bring really a year or a year and a half worth of food with them so that they could survive until they got agriculture going. Agriculture was the first imperative of the new settlers. They also faced a number of other challenges. The climate here was unlike anything that they were used to back home. We have what climatologists call a very severe climate. It can be 95 degrees, as it was a couple of months ago around here, and then in just a very short time, a matter of maybe 150 days, it can be 30 below zero. They weren't really ready for that. Then there was the challenge of a hostile population which already occupied the land. Native American people, or the first peoples, they weren't excited about these interlopers from overseas, and in many instances set about to kill them. And then the biggest challenge of all was the vast forest. Think of New Hampshire as being 95% trees. The land area of New Hampshire, 95% covered with trees. Vast forest, huge trees. About 65% of that forest cover was hardwoods, and about 35% of that hardwood cover was beech trees. Beech trees in the primeval forest could grow to 6 to 7 feet thick. How in the world are we going to grow crops with that kind of challenge? Well, they set about to do it in a most brutal way. Much of the land was cleared with fire. They burned down the forest. Let's say we have a big beech tree right here. What are we going to do? It may be 6 feet thick. What those settlers did was take a hatchet and girdle the tree, and that killed the tree. So the second year there would be no leaves in the overstory. So the sunlight could shine down through, hit the forest floor. They could begin to scratch around in the dirt and grow oats or wheat or barley, get food production from the way. After 4 or 5 years, that tree would have dried out enough so that they could set it afire. They'd build a fire around the base, send the flames up, burn off the leaves. But a 6-foot tree trunk won't burn through very readily. So the landscape would soon be covered with what we call stubs, 15, 20 feet high, nasty, charcoal, horrible looking thing. After 12 or 14 years, the roots on those stubs were rotted enough so they could hitch oxen, take a chain, put the oxen to work, pulling these things over, getting them out of the way, and end up with what we today call a field, meadow, or a forest. We have no conception of what they went through to accomplish it. Enormous danger, terribly, terribly hard work. And it just went on and on and on for 200 years. After they'd been doing this for 100 or so years, they began to realize that the byproduct of all this fire had value, the ashes. The ashes could be gathered up and put in barrels and sold. Ashes became the first cash crop of New England agriculture. Ashes contained potassium. Potassium, essential element in the manufacture of gunpowder, of glass, and of many other essential commodities, as well as being a wonderful fertilizer agent. So after 200 years of all of this, New Hampshire, south of the White Mountains, was 80% cleared of trees. It was cleared to open fields. That is over 3 million acres of land killed with hand labor and fire. Incredible undertaking. Well, that all sets up the greatest period of agricultural prosperity and the only period of agricultural prosperity we have ever known in New Hampshire and New England. True agricultural prosperity when a lot of people got rich from it. 1809, Thomas Jefferson is the president. He appoints a man named William Jarvis, who was a prominent Boston businessman, to be the American ambassador to the Spanish court. Mr. Jarvis was a prominent businessman. He was obviously politically connected. He was the ideal type of person that Jefferson wanted to send abroad to represent American interests. Mr. Jarvis also was very interested in agriculture, and he owned a large farm in Wethersfield Bow, Vermont, which is about 18 miles south of where we are today. Jarvis arrives in Lisbon and presents his credentials to the Spanish court, sets up housekeeping, and then makes a foray out in the countryside where he sees vast flocks of sheep. Sheep like nothing he has ever seen before, because they produce enormous fleeces. The wool on them is this thick, and they're also very wrinkled, so they have a lot of surface to produce wool. Up to that point, European nobility had embargoed good quality livestock from leaving to the New World because they were inferior competition. But at this point, the Spanish nobility was facing imminent threat of invasion by Napoleon and his armies, and they needed to raise cash to wage war. Jarvis and an Englishman put together a deal where they bought 15,000 of these fantastic sheep. They cut them and divided them into two batches. Half of them went to the British Isles, and Jarvis arranged for his half to be exported to New England. About half of them were imported through the Port of New York. The rest came to Boston and Newburyport. Mr. Jarvis reserved 350 for his own farm in Wethersfield, and there being no trucks and no railroads or anything like that in those days, you imagine driving 350 sheep overland 110 miles from Newburyport to Wethersfield, Vermont. Quite a challenge, to say nothing of what they must have gone through to get the sheep over here on boats. They had to load on enough feed and water, have somebody to tend the animals, and all. It was an incredible undertaking. So, these sheep, about 4,000 or more the first year, and then the balance the second year, 1810, become the foundation of a revolution in sheep production here in New England. And it becomes a bubble, a boom, like a gold rush. Everybody who has a farm wants to get their hands on some of these sheep and get into the business of producing wool. And it's off and running, such that by 1815, this town that you folks are in today had over 1,000 sheep. And in 10 years' time, that number of sheep exploded to over 10,000 sheep just in this town. As this resource of wool was coming off the farms in the 1815 era, it began to attract capital to build mills to process the wool into textiles, into blankets and garments. And so you can go down here to Claremont, 14 miles from here, and visit the mill district there. And the earliest mill, a big brick building, built 1816. And these mill buildings were popping up all over New Hampshire. Any place you find a waterfall, there was water power, and they built these mills. Claremont, Lebanon, Newport, Ashwella, Pittsfield, Somerville. They dotted the landscape. Many of them were made of wood, others were made much better out of brick. They faced great problems as this explosion in sheep numbers was covering the landscape. The first great problem was confinement. How in the heck am I going to keep my sheep separate from my topier's sheep, and how is he going to keep his sheep separated from Murray sheep? We've got a big problem. They've cut down all the trees, and wire fence hasn't been invented yet. What do they have left? Got rocks, all kinds of rocks. And so in New England, they went on a binge of building stone walls. In excess of 250,000 miles of stone walls were built, most 4 feet high, 4 foot high fence. Stone wall keeps in sheep, won't keep a cow. Second great problem we faced was predators. This was the natural habitat of the eastern timber wolf. Timber wolves kill for the helper, and sheep, when they see a carnivore, they run. So it was going to be impossible to raise sheep with wolves hanging around. So it became imperative to exterminate the wolf population. Well, they were helped along because the natural habitat of the eastern timber wolf is the forest. And if you cut down the forest, it puts a lot of pressure on the wolves, but they shot the rest of them, got rid of it. Third great problem was disease and parasites. Anytime you take ruminant animals and build up the numbers, you get parasites on them. And by that I mean what's called stomach worms, nematodes that live in the gut and debilitate the sheep. They don't kill the sheep, but make the sheep weak and susceptible to other kinds of disease. Well, they tried all kinds of things to try to deal with this problem. But my favorite strategy that they used was to take a commonly grown plant. Around here, a lot of it was grown, and they would press it and get the juice out. Take the juice, make a tea, pour some of this tea down the sheep's gut. What do you suppose that plant was? It's called tobacco. Right? So if any of you are still chewing tobacco, or you are contemplating smoking tobacco, consider that the chemicals in that stuff kill worms in sheep's guts, and they can damn well kill you. There's another problem they have is ticks. Sheep ticks. They do the same thing on the outside of the sheep as the worms do on the inside. And after they got done shearing here in this town, they would go down to the brook down here, they dam up the brook and dump a lot of arsenic into the water, all right, and drive the sheep through this slot to try to kill the ticks. Well, they didn't have any EPA that sort of thing. But the greatest challenge they faced was getting enough food for these animals to feed them. And so that involved every single able-bodied male 10 years and up in the harvest of hay to feed these animals through the long cold winter. And anybody who was over about 10 years of age had to be handy with a scythe, had to know how to swing the scythe. And so there was no Xbox, there was no Twitter, no soccer camps. Everybody that could swung a scythe in the summer. And that was an enormous undertaking, putting up enough feed for all these animals. So those were the challenges. So in a matter of about 10 years, we had in New Hampshire 500,000 sheep. Vermont had 1.1 million sheep. It was an incredible boom, and people were getting rich. The wool was very valuable. In today's dollars, we estimate it might have been as much as $70 a pound. So for you collecting a 10-pound fleece, she generated $700 a calf. And it was unlike anything we've ever seen since. People got money. People got rich doing it. Even the little farmers would do well. But 1837 came to be climax year. It was a perfect storm of situation. The panic, the banking panic that set in, triggered a depression. The Erie Canal had been opened, railroads were being opened to the west, bringing competition for the New England wool market, depressing the price that farmers could get for their wool. And the Industrial Revolution was having a profound effect. People were working indoors, didn't need heavy woolen clothes. The box stove had been perfected, central heat was coming, didn't need as much in the way of heavy blankets to keep warm. But here in this area, here in the valley, the greatest problem was the exhaustion of the soil. Too many sheep. And as early as 1840, elevations above 1,500 feet, which is right out your window over here, look to the east on the side of Grantham Mountain, they began to abandon sheep culture. And the numbers of sheep began to plummet. And it was just over. The boom was over. The money that was being made dried up. And so we are left with two elements of legacy from that great period that we can see on the land today. Number one is, of course, the stone walls. Any place you walk around Meriden and you see a stone wall, that land on either side of that wall was once open and supporting a sheep population. It's said that two men, a team of oxen, a length of chain, an iron bar, and a stone boat could build one rod's worth of stone wall in a day's time. That's 16.5 feet. Any one of us could go out, you come out with me and we'll give it a try. I guarantee you we will not build 16 feet in one day with a team of oxen. So the stone wall all over the landscape, everywhere. A lot of them have been taken up, been destroyed. We're down now in New England, less than 100,000 miles of stone walls estimates now. And then the second legacy is the architecture. Phil talked about the many changes that took place, and those were happening on buildings all over this community and all over the countryside. In the 1820s and the 1830s, people had money in their pocket to build better houses, better buildings, embellish their house, make them look more attractive, and also to build public buildings. And then, of course, the great mills. Many of them still stand today, strong as ever. The brick church at the foot of the hill here has 4 sisters. There are 2 in the Plainfield village, 1 in Cornish, and 1 in Hartland, all probably built with brick from a common brickyard. Very, very pretty, attractive buildings, strong and sturdy today. Lovely examples of the period. All built between 1832 and 1837. People had money to spend. So that's the legacy, stone walls and the lovely buildings. There's a third legacy of this. It's the cultural social one. The end of the agricultural prosperity and the effect it had on this region and this town right here. After the Civil War, you had horrendous losses of young men in the Civil War, and then this incredible shrinking of the agricultural sector. It was no longer a money-making enterprise. And people began to leave. Between 1860 and 1890, this town lost 30% of its population. It went from 1,700 people in 1860 to by 1920, 700 people. And other towns all around here suffered the same terrible losses. And that triggered a time of melancholy, of leaving, of feelings of loss, of frustration. People were leaving to go work in the great mills of the Merrimack Valley, to go work in the cities, or they were packing up and going to Oregon and California. They were leaving in droves. This town lost 40% of its tax base in 30 years' time. Why did it lose the tax base? Because there was nobody to buy property. Nobody wanted to be there. They wanted to go. They got out. And so it was just a horrendous time. And it really hasn't been until 1980 that we rebounded in this town for the number of people that we had in 1860 in this town. It's a fascinating situation. So while the people were leaving, the land that had been cleared at such enormous toil was reverting to forest. Mother Nature wants all of New England to be woods. And if you leave her alone, in a matter of a few years, the forest returns and takes over. And for these people in the 1870s and 1880s to see that happen before their eyes, you think of a person that might have been 50 or 60 years old in 1870. He could have touched the hand that cleared the land. And to see it revert to forest causes enormous grief and almost feelings of shame that this is happening. And I know the feeling myself, because right around here, I cut hay and baled hay on fields in the 1970s that now have trees that are 30 feet tall. And so, I grieve about that, and I feel like we're feeling lost. So I implore you, as you hear, don't spend all your time immediately on the campus. Get out and walk around, walk through the Meriden Bird Club, a perfect example of the reversion of once cleared agricultural land back to forest, and see those stone walls. And if you can do it, I'd love to see some of you go over to Windsor and climb Mount Scutney and bring a hammer and chisel with you, because on Brownsville Rock and up at the summit, there are numerous numerals that say KUA, KUA 02, and that's not 2000. So when you get up there, you stand and you look this way, and you will see the vastness of the forest. So I'd say New Hampshire now is about 87% forest. And just think of it, to go from 85% almost cleared to 85% forested in just a little over a century's time. So I think I've talked long enough, and I'm sure you're hungry for lunch, but I did hear there's time for questions. I'd be happy to take questions. Maybe Joe's got an answer or two for you as well.